So countries need to get their house in order, less corruption or no corruption preferably, strong institutions, strong judicial systems, protection of property rights, etc. Very important.
So Thomas, can you please tell me which are the most promising economies south of the Sahara and for what reasons?
Well, I guess the promising economies are those that have delivered on their promise for quite a few years now already. You know, it's the usual suspects. It's Kenya, it's Rwanda, it's Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, it's Senegal. All these countries have growth north of 4%, which is above the average for sub-Saharan Africa. Mind you, GDP growth does not mean that population is actually benefiting that much, right? You have also to look at health indicators, wage growth, etc. But by and large, these are the countries that really are developing very well. Now, why are they developing very well? Because they have managed to diversify their economies, and also, interestingly, I guess, they are not resource-based economies, not in terms of natural resources. So the big resource-rich countries, Nigeria, Angola, actually not doing all that well right now because, of course, they're dependent on the price of the oil, etc.
How can these economies expand?
Well, you have to look at three main elements: infrastructure, health, and education. Health and wealth go in tandem, as they say, but education and wealth go in tandem, and infrastructure and wealth as well. So these three sectors need to be developed, and there are different ways to do it. You know, for instance, PPP is a big topic, public-private partnerships. I just came back from Benin basically to train government officials in how to develop the infrastructure through participation of private financiers. So that definitely is a way. It has its downsides, but attracting foreign money into the country is important, but you have to get the conditions right for money to come to your countries.
So is the key infrastructure?
Well, definitely for resource-rich countries, because we have to get the coal from the mine to the harbor, and we have to have an efficient harbor, basically, then to transport the coal to China, for instance. Right? It's very important. But it's also about water. It's about electricity. And incidentally, again, by the example of Benin, in the evening around Cotonou, the lights go out because 80% of the population still have no access to electricity. Right? So the basic services need to be in place. Now, to finance this, for instance, to come back to PPP, is very difficult because it's not always that there's an immediate return on those investments, but they are, of course, key.
Now, if a country is full of political uncertainty, does that mean that the country's economy is dead in the water?
Well, very important point. Political uncertainty, political risk, if you will, meaning, of course, that an investment may be subject to a longer return on investment due to political reasons or loss, right? So to give you concrete examples, I mean, a few years ago, we wanted to set up a simulator business to train pilots for East African Airlines in Nairobi, Wilson Airport, so the local airport. And it was investment about 8 million, and it had pretty good returns of about 35% per year. It was not enough. We could not finance it with partners because they said in this country, we consider political risk too high for that kind of return. We need 50%, right? So a project that would have been very, very healthy and profitable also for the users, Kenya Airlines and other East African carriers, would have saved them millions per year, wasn't possible because country risk was too high. There you see the immediate link between country risk and economic development. So countries need to get their house in order, less corruption or no corruption preferably, strong institutions, strong judicial systems, protection of property rights, etc. Very important.
What role are public and private partnerships playing in diversifying the economies and bringing in foreign investment? Yeah,
diversification, absolutely important. Now you can also over-diversify. What you've seen actually is that PPP has become a bad word in the UK. Why is that? Because the UK has more or less invented PPP. And in the early days there, hospitals were built, and of course that can make a lot of sense unless there are already too many hospitals, right? Or in France. France has become notorious for local politicians building arenas, sports arenas, so on, through PPP models. In other words, infrastructure that does not really have a real return on investment. Now, the downside with PPP is that if you build something that is not economically really viable, you don't have the returns, but the future generations of taxpayers have still to pay for it, because the contracts are over 30, 40 years with the private investors. And that obviously is a huge burden on future generations. So it's very tricky, and that's the whole reason why people, governments ask PPP experts, like myself, incidentally, to advise them on which infrastructure they should finance through PPP and which they should better not.
Well, thank you, Thomas, for joining me in the studio today. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure.
And thank you at home for clicking back. Be sure to subscribe to our channel for more interviews like this.